Diplomacy in full swing at a lower level as well. The U.S. Special Representative for North Korea is due in Seoul this afternoon. We have a rundown of what to expect. Plus, drivers in South Korea are feeling the pinch as the government starts reducing the level of its fuel tax cuts. Prices at the pump jump to a 5-month high. So let's start with last night's phone call between the leaders of South Korea and the United States. Presidents Moon Jae-in and Donald Trump highlighted the importance of not allowing North Korea to veer off track when it comes to denuclearization. Also examined, the Blue House says, the possibility of Mr. Trump visiting Seoul in the coming weeks. Our Shin Se-min starts us off.
Speaking over the phone for the first time in nearly a month and in the wake of the North's recent projectile launches, Presidents Moon Jae-in and Donald Trump discussed ways to resume talks on scrapping North Korea's nuclear program while maintaining the current momentum for dialogue. South Korea's presidential spokesperson said in a statement that the leaders also talked about ways to prevent Pyongyang running off the tracks in regards to the denuclearization negotiations. Seoul's top office added the leaders agreed that their proper response following North Korea's unexpected projectile launch last weekend was extremely effective. In particular, President Moon said he appreciated Trump's tweet that came after the military activity, saying it played a crucial role in keeping North Korea and the denuclearization process moving in the right direction. President Trump tweeted that he believes North Korean leader Kim Jong-un realizes his country's great economic potential and that he will do nothing to interfere or end it. The White House said the two leaders discussed recent developments regarding North Korea and how to achieve the regime's final, fully verified denuclearization, though it did not provide additional information on the call. The leaders also talked about the recent UN report that depicted a grim image of North Korea and its food shortages. The Blue House spokesperson said President Trump assessed Seoul's provision of humanitarian food aid to North Korea as very timely and a positive step, adding that Trump said he supported the move. President Trump's stance is consistent from a month ago when he said he had no issue with such humanitarian support.
And I'm okay with that, to be honest. I think you have to be okay with that. And South Korea is doing certain things to help out with food and various other things for North Korea.
Both leaders also agreed to work toward having President Trump visit Seoul in the coming months, especially with the U.S. leader making 2 separate trips to Japan in May and June. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, the Trump administration's point man on North Korea, who is currently visiting Japan, will arrive in Seoul in the coming hours to meet with South Korean officials to discuss the regime's latest military activity. Stephen Biegun will also be discussing new ways to advance the final, fully verified denuclearization of the North. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun will arrive in South Korea on Wednesday afternoon to discuss North Korea's latest firing of projectiles off its east coast. Staying in Seoul until Friday, Seoul's foreign ministry says Biegun will meet with his South Korean counterpart, Lee Do-hun, South Korea's Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs. He's also expected to hold a meeting of the Seoul-Washington Working Group on ways to resume dialogue between Pyongyang and Washington. Originally, the issue of providing humanitarian aid to the North was the major agenda of the meeting, considering the North is experiencing its worst food crisis in a decade. However, Seoul and Washington are set to come up with coordination measures to respond to Pyongyang's latest military activity. Biegun is also expected to hold talks with South Korean officials in charge of the country's diplomacy and security policies, including newly appointed Unification Minister Kim Yeon-chul and Kim Yeon-jong, Second Deputy Chief of the Blue House National Security Office. Meanwhile, the U.S. envoy for the North, who's visiting Japan before flying to Seoul, said Tuesday that the North's latest military activity suggests the regime feels anxious. Japan's national broadcaster NHK quoted Biegun as saying the second North Korea-U.S. summit in Hanoi ended prematurely with no deal, as Washington was unable to accept the regime's requests. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
The deputy nuclear envoys of South Korea and Russia met in Moscow on Tuesday to discuss the latest developments surrounding the Korean Peninsula. Officials say Jung Yeon-do, Director General of the North Korean Nuclear Affairs Bureau at Seoul's foreign ministry, met with his Russian counterpart Oleg Burmistrov and Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Igor Morgulov, who oversees the Kremlin's Asia-Pacific affairs. Seoul's foreign ministry said the two sides reaffirmed the common goal of establishing everlasting peace on the Korean Peninsula and achieving North Korea's complete denuclearization. Seoul and Moscow also agreed to maintain the momentum for dialogue among the concerned parties and to focus on exerting efforts to resume Pyongyang-Washington talks. South Korea's ruling Democratic Party will elect a new floor leader this afternoon. It's a three-way race between Lee In-young, No Eun-rae and Kim Tae-nyeon, all three of them three-term lawmakers. Now, Lee has vowed to reform the party if elected. No has pledged to boost communication within the party, while Kim has been highlighting his experience as the party's former policy chief. If a candidate fails to win a majority of votes, the top two will go head-to-head in a runoff. The new floor leader will replace Hong Yong-pyo and be tasked with steering the party to victory in the 2020 general elections. He will also have to mend ties with the main opposition Liberty Korea Party following the fast-tracking of key reform bills. South Korea's current account surplus for the first quarter of 2019 slumped to a low not seen in roughly 7 years. The Bank of Korea says the current account surplus recorded $11.25 billion US. That's the smallest figure since Q2 of 2012, mainly due to slowing global trade and sluggish chip exports. Overall exports and imports dipped by around 8% on year in the first quarter. In March, the current account surplus recorded $8.4 billion, remaining in the black for the 83rd straight month. Though it fell by 8% on year, South Korea's services account deficit grew to $2.3 billion. Now, China's top trade negotiator is headed to Washington for 2 days starting on Thursday. Chinese Vice Premier Ryu Hyun and his team are flying there despite President Trump's decision to impose new tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods from Friday. Lee Seung-jae with more.
Despite the atmosphere surrounding the trade talks shifting dramatically in the space of a week, the Chinese delegation, led by Vice Premier Ryu Hyun, one of the country's leading economic policymakers, is heading to Washington for another round of trade negotiations. China's Commerce Ministry announced on Tuesday that the Chinese delegation will hold talks with their American counterparts on Thursday and Friday. The trip comes in the wake of President Trump's announcement on Sunday that he would raise U.S. tariffs on Friday to 25% from the previous 10% for $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Caught off guard, the Chinese delegation were initially uncertain whether Liu should travel to Washington. However, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has said that if the Chinese trade delegation brings a new proposal with them on Thursday, the U.S. delegation will review it and pass it to President Trump. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer says the administration's current plan is still to hike tariffs at 12:01 a.m. Friday, Washington time. Experts say the next round of trade talks will be crucial, as it will either end the trade war or escalate it even further with more tit-for-tat tariffs. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, average gasoline prices at the pump here in South Korea have surpassed 1,500 won, or $1.30 a litre, for the first time in 5 months. Now, this jump in prices came as the government began reducing its fuel tax cut on Tuesday. The South Korean government is phasing out its fuel tax cuts from 15% to 7%, a move that will run through the end of August. The industry reports there will be a difference in the speed and degree of rise at each gas station, but it's inevitable prices will rise over the next couple of weeks or so. Scrapped U.S. sanctions waivers on Iranian oil are expected to also put upward pressure on oil prices this month. Now, the LA Dodgers on a hot streak with 7 wins out of their last 10 games, are looking to continue their sizzling start to the MLB season. Stepping up to the mound against the Atlanta Braves today is South Korea's southpaw Ryu Hyun-jin. Ryu, who is yet to allow more than 2 runs in any start this season, goes head-to-head with Atlanta's Max Fried, who's 4-1 with an ERA of 2.11 this season. Ryu is looking for his 4th win of the season. The Dodgers are currently in first place in the National League West with a 2-game lead over Arizona. Now, Iran could be about to stop abiding by some provisions in the 2015 nuclear deal, particularly on research on advanced centrifuges amid growing tensions between Tehran and Washington. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Hongyu. So has there been any official announcement from Tehran?
Well, Mark, according to state media report, Iran is due to announce plans to diminish its commitment to the nuclear deal on Wednesday. This expected announcement will be 1 year to the day since President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear accord, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Tensions between Iran and the U.S. have spiked since Trump called the accord the worst deal ever and quit despite Iran's pledges that it would never seek to build a nuclear bomb. Since then, the Trump administration has imposed sanctions on Iran's oil and financial sectors, which has hurt them badly, pushing the value of its currency to record lows and increase its annual inflation rate. Iran has not yet bolted from the agreement or resumed its nuclear enrichment, and it is unclear what steps Iran will take. Analysts say Iran is unlikely to renounce the agreement because that could alienate European countries as well as China and Russia. Instead, Iran is likely to reduce its compliance with the JCPOA. According to Iran's state news agency IRNA, President Hassan Rouhani will send a letter informing the remaining parties to the deal, and he might also deliver a speech outlining the details. If Iran no longer abides by limits on uranium enrichment established by the accord, it would be the first time the nation had deliberately reduced compliance with the nuclear agreement. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo canceled a visit to Berlin on Tuesday at short notice, citing, quote, pressing issues that forced him to pull out of talks with Chancellor Angela Merkel. Those pressing issues were revealed later. The State Department later saying Pompeo made an unannounced visit to Baghdad for talks with Iraq's leaders, including the Prime Minister. Pompeo reportedly told them he stood by their fight for freedom and democracy. Watchers say his trip could be due to Washington's rising tensions with Iran and reassure the Iraqis of America's commitment to the country. Russian investigators are continuing to probe last Sunday's crash landing of an Aeroflot passenger jet that killed 41 people. Local media say investigators increasingly believe the fire started due to pilot error after the plane was struck by lightning. Russia's investigative committee has opened a criminal case and is looking into whether the pilot violated air safety rules. No official reason has been given, but authorities are considering equipment failure for a lightning strike as the primary cause of the crash.
Time now for our Life and Info segment, where we focus on information that should be useful for your everyday lives. Now, coffee, of course, is one of the most loved drinks anywhere you go in the world, but here in South Korea, demand for it has been soaring, and many people say what gradually started as a habit has become a culture of its very own, a very lucrative business as well. Today, we're going to look at the wide spectrum of the coffee market here in South Korea, particularly in terms of the wide range of prices you can find. I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by our Kim Mo-kyun. So, Mo-kyun, let's talk coffee then, shall we?
Yes, good morning, Mark. Before we go to the details, let me ask you a question. Do you like coffee?
Yes, of course. I like coffee. I drink probably around 2 or 3 cups of coffee a day. I've already had 2 this morning.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I also love coffee. And for me, it's more like a routine, just like you said, after getting up from bed or after, having lunch. And like you said, for most Koreans, the love for coffee is amazing. And recent data actually showed that an average person living in Korea drinks more than 500 cups of coffee a year, and that's around 1.5 cup for every day. And demand is continuing to rise too, and the size of the coffee market is still growing at a rapid pace. If we look at the screen here, we can see that the local coffee market was nearly 4 times bigger in the latest data compared to a decade ago. And especially in South Korea, the trend has been even more evident in coffee shops, with annual sales of major franchises sitting in the world's top 3.
Yeah, depending on what time of the day you go, it's almost impossible to find a seat in some of those big franchises here in South Korea, especially the comfortable ones that are the premium ones in the window or whatever. But gone really are the days when Koreans used to just drink the instant mix coffee that you pour into the paper cup and whatnot. But now you can get coffee in all different types from anywhere in the world, hot and cold. The varieties are endless.
So it seems like you really kind of love coffee.
Yeah.
How much do you usually spend when you go to a coffee shop?
Well, I generally make my own coffee, but when I go to the coffee shop, I will spend roughly around $3 to $4 because I tend to only drink hot Americano, hot black coffee.
Okay, it seems like you're not too fancy when it comes to coffee. So did you know that actually coffee prices in shops could range from 70 cents to up to $9 and perhaps even more?
Yeah, I did know that, yeah. Well, I refuse to pay anything more than $5. I have been in coffee shops where they charge in excess of $10 a cup, and I pretty much do a U-turn and walk out the door because I refuse to pay that much. But what you're saying then, we're seeing this huge range of prices, below $1 at one end and over $10 sometimes in another end. So that's a tenfold difference for what some people would argue is essentially pretty similar coffee.
Yes, like what you said, the coffee market is actually booming in Korea, and the demand for coffees that are expensive and affordable are both increasing rapidly. As the market size expands, I think it's because the people's tastes also kind of mature.
Yeah.
In recent years, specialty coffee brands have been booming in Korea, and public demand for such premium coffee has been spiking. Last year, premium coffee market size reached some $865 million, taking up to 20% of the total market share. Specialty coffees are premium coffees, which score 80 or more out of 100 from the Specialty Coffee Association of America. And due to the intense demand, one popular specialty coffee brand has decided to launch its first store in South Korea. And I popped along and I had the chance to meet the CEO.
But mainly deeply honored by the fact that so many people would come out and visit us on our first day. We have guests, for Koreans have been visiting Blue Bottle in America and Japan for years. So I know Blue Bottle is special in Korea, and that's why we're here. We feel a responsibility to be in Seoul.
Yes, so as you can see, tons of people have been waiting in line, and some of them even for like 4 hours to just get the taste of the special coffee. And the price tag was a little bit higher than the average, but most of the people I talked to, they said it was worth the wait. Let's take a listen.
I've heard a lot of effort goes into making specialty drinks, such as only selling coffee that is 48 hours out of the roster. I think it's worth the wait.
I've always loved visiting specialty coffee brands all over the world. While it's a bit expensive, it's worth the cost because of the unique taste and the experience of being able to watch the brewing process.
Well, it's great to see people enjoying their coffee. I don't know about you, Mo-kyun, but I'd never stand in line for 4 hours. just for a cup of coffee. It must be a
Maybe
fantastic.
two.
I hope that CEO brought you out a cup for free, but let's not get into that right now.
Yes.
We can talk about that after the news. But now we are seeing more of these big franchises as well, moving in to this premium specialty coffee market. Even Starbucks, I believe, has this new sub-brand. It's called Starbucks Reserve. And I've definitely been seeing more and more of these pop up on the streets of Seoul. So this really is a big emerging market within the already massive coffee market here in South Korea.
Yes, actually, Starbucks Korea expanded its already heavy presence in the country through its upscale Starbucks Reserve store that serves specialty coffee made by skilled baristas. The brand has been opening Reserve stores in South Korea around 3 years ago, and it first started with 5 stores nationwide in 2016. But as of March this year, the number had multiplied to 47, and the company plans to open more even in the future.
Yeah, I'm sure they do because they are full most days. But it is an extra choice for those who perhaps have a little bit of extra money in their pockets, those who have become accustomed to exotic coffees from around the world, or perhaps just a guy or a girl who wants to go on a nice date with their new partner. Let's turn our attention though, because it isn't all about highbrow coffee, is it? There are lots of cheap, affordable, but also relatively nice tasting coffee options out there as well.
Yes, Mark. While some people actually, like you said, look for distinct coffees with unique characteristics, others tend to look for more cost-effective and accessible coffees. And since 2015, Korea's 3 major convenience stores actually started opening their own branded coffees for takeout. They've seen their sales surge since they were first introduced, with figures doubling due to their reasonable price between 80 cents to $2.
Yeah, I've seen them around. You can't miss them if you go into any convenience store here in Korea. And I believe they are very popular with office workers during the lunch hour.
Definitely.
Because they don't have to spend too much money and they can just take it out with them after they've had their lunch. I've yet to try it. Have you? Does it taste similar to what you might find in the coffee shop?
Well, in fact, I did quite a lot of times, and it was really good. People might think that the quality and taste of the coffee could be, linked to the price, but actually, these convenience stores are providing coffee beans from countries that are really famous for coffee, such as Costa Rica, Colombia, and even Brazil.
Okay, so that's good. So you can buy decent quality coffee for a reasonable price pretty much everywhere you go in Korea. But with demand for coffee growing in convenience stores and premium brands as well, where do we see this trend eventually going? Because it doesn't seem like it's stopping anytime soon.
Well, actually, for this opinion, I kind of talked to a professor studying consumers' trend, and she said that this trend was kind of easy to spot. Let's take a listen.
It's natural for consumer demands to be segmented when a market expands. It's really a matter of how much value people give to coffee. Now that drinking coffee is the norm, consumers who consider it as a daily routine tend to look for the best price. But with the so-called personal taste trend spreading among young people, others seek out something unique and are willing to pay more for it.
She also said that the polarized trend would likely continue for the next few years because coffee for South Koreans is also a medium of conversation and also a means of building relationships with people.
Yes, well, I'm sure you'll give me one of those $10 cups of coffee after the news.
Yes.
You seem not to have any on the desk for me now, but it's a pleasure, as always, Mil-kyun, and we'd like to see you again in the studio before too long, and thanks for your report.
Thank you for having me.
Good morning. We had a breezy start to Parents' Day in South Korea, and we'll have a repeat of yesterday's weather conditions in most parts. Then a rise in temperatures above the seasonal norms by the end of the week. Meanwhile, those of you in Gangwon-do province will need to be extra careful if you have to handle fire. A strong wind advisory and dry weather warnings have been reissued in the areas where the massive wildfire broke out in April, so please be extra careful. It's going to be a warm and sunny afternoon with lots of sunshine along with very high UV rays in most parts of the country. So sunglasses and sunblock are a must, but we'll have decent air all day today. Daily highs will be ranging between 20 and 26 degrees Celsius. Gyeongju, in fact, will have temperature gaps of nearly 20 degrees, so please keep that in mind. No rain is in the forecast for another 5 days or so, so the prolonged dry weather is very likely to cause vegetable prices to shoot up in South Korea in the coming month. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Wednesday morning here in Seoul. Stay tuned to us here on Arirang TV. And a reminder, our next newscast is coming up at noon Korea time. That's with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.